Morning, church. I'll just turn that around there somewhere. There we go. Book of Faith. What a wonderful book Hebrews is, hey? Just a fact before I start. Did you know Hebrews is part of a trilogy? Did anyone know that? Way back in the Old Testament, there's a book called, a very much unread and not heard too often in church, called Habakkuk. And in Habakkuk there was a verse that says, the just shall be... I've gone blank. Don't you know blank? The just shall live by faith. That's it. How could I forget live? You may have noticed last week or the week before, that actual verse was quoted in the reading through Hebrews. But you might also be unaware that that verse is also posted in Romans and Galatians, and as I said, a Trinity in Hebrews. Quite amazing. When we look at the verse itself, the just, well, who are the just? The book of Romans tells you who the just are, if you go and read Romans. How shall they live? Galatians covers that to a T. And of course, where we are today, Hebrews, faith. The just shall live by faith. There's no other greater book that covers all our wonderful men of God than the book of Hebrews. And it's quite interesting, that little verse, in case you're not aware, in Habakkuk, that's the very verse that a certain Roman Catholic priest read and changed his whole mind and went and hammered something on a wall or on a door, and the Reformation started. That was the verse that Martin Luther started him right off. So just a little bit of history there for you about that verse and which appears in our reading. Anyway, let me start by telling you where the reading today is from the New King James Version. It's Hebrews 11:17 all the way down to 40. And some of my greatest heroes of all time are in this book, biblical heroes. And you'll be familiar with most of the names. 17. By faith, Abraham, being tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promise offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac your seed shall be called, concluding that God was able to raise him up even from the dead, and where he even received him in a figure. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau concerning things to come. And by faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of his sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, dying, remembered concerning the exodus of the sons of Israel, who gave orders concerning his bones. By faith, Moses, having been born, was hidden 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's commandments. They trusted God. Having become great, Moses, by faith, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God and to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a time, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Through faith he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood, lest he who destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians attempted to do, were all drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encompassed for 7 days. By faith the harlot Rahab, did not perish with those who did not believe when she had received the spies with peace. Some great stories in amongst all those. Whoa. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in flight and fight, turned to flight the armies of the strangers. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they may obtain a better resurrection. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yes, more of bonds and imprisonments. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with a sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted and tormented. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in the deserts and mountains and dens and caves of the earth. And these all, having obtained a good report through faith, did not receive the promise. For God had provided some better thing for us, that they should not be made perfect without us. All these wonderful men of God, and yet we receive the promise. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you for that lively reading. I'm going to put this up to my height a little bit. The what? Right. Right. I'm going to do a bit of swiveling around here for a moment. There we go. Good morning, everybody. So, it seems somehow I've managed to get locked into wrapping up Hebrews. So I'm going to do my best of tying it up, and I'll clearly get all the loose ends nicely wrapped into a bow. But before we start to explore today's text, I just wanted to open up the floor over this kind of exploration of Hebrews and the concepts of a bigger view that we see through Hebrews. Was there anything that's kind of really stuck out for you personally in engaging with the book of Hebrews over this time? Now, you might not have anything, might be quiet as a mouse, but I thought I'd throw the offer out there. Yes, Pam.
We heard about so many different people, but their main aim was that they had faith.
Yeah.
What they were experiencing.
Yes, faith is a massive link to all these different people and individuals throughout the books. Hey, beautiful, love that.
Similar to Pam, but I think the big picture is important. I think because it reminds us of God's faithfulness.
Yes, it's a big thread there too, the big picture stuff that really echoes God, eh? Love that, thank you. Oh, sorry. Good pickup. Yeah, there's a cheeky little Rahab thrown in the mix, isn't there? Oh, we'll get onto that one. Oh. Yeah. Hebrews is an interesting one because traditionally, especially in the first little bit of the centuries and that, it was commonly attributed to Paul, but it actually, there's no authorship to Hebrews. There's no stamp that says it was written by this, which is kind of odd if it was coming from Paul. So at this point in time, common scholarship would probably say that it is an unknown author. That seems to be the main consensus, that we don't actually fully have anyone locked in. There's a lot of debate still around that, but currently it's kind of beautiful too. I kind of love the fact that it kind of is left to a mystery of who it was. It doesn't matter. What's important here is the message. Yeah. Any other thoughts and reflections before we dive in?
It seems to go back to all these old ancient people, but we've
Yes.
He must have known his Old Testament he or she must have known the Old Testament really, really well.
Oh, they absolutely knew their stuff. Yeah, the author of Hebrews, like even listing all their names and the deeds and the delving into it. Oh, they knew their stuff. They were clearly entrenched in the Hebraic stories and language and symbols and all those kinds of things wrapped in a beautiful bow. But let's jump right in, shall we? Yes? Yeah?
All the troubles that I had, once I became patient, kind and tolerant, I didn't hold anything against somebody. I noticed my whole world, my whole being had changed. That by faith, I applied those principles given by St. Paul. And so I suppose now in reflection of Hebrews, we also have testimonies of what Moses did and all of those sorts of things for all the time, but now it applies to us.
Yeah, fair. Thanks for those reflections. So, faith is a big theme of this text. Would that be fair to assume? Would that be fair to kind of throw in there? Excellent with today's kind of title of the passion to live by faith with vision and hope. It's a good kind of lead off to kind of conclude with. But I'll be honest, I'm probably not going to be able to wrap it all nicely together in a beautiful bow. It might be a bit messy. I might leave a fair few loose ends, but I think that's the point. Hebrews is meant to kind of leave us with a fair bit of grappling and thinking still. I don't think there's meant to be a full stop at the end of this kind of sermon or this kind of topic or this kind of theme in faith in general, right? Because it's messy, kind of like the human experience. Human experience is like all these loose ends and all these loose ties and conflictions and grappling and wrestling. And I think that's kind of what engaging with faith is also seriously about. Faith is a fascinating thing to reflect on. And I've been doing a little bit of that this week as I prepared and led up to my sermon. But I also kind of got quite knocked out this week and got quite sick. I've just come through the end. So I won't take any offense if you kind of keep a little bit of distance away from me after this sermon. I'm pretty sure I'm out the other end. But man, I got freaking knocked out. And I am a bit of a busybody. I like to go on little adventures. I'm a bit of a nature boy. I'm not designed to just sit there. I don't think any of us really are. And I kind of because I had to take time off work, which would be fine if I could actually do things, but I'm bedridden. My coughing, my energy is just zapped. I think I had to go to the shops at one point. This is Breck's whinging section, by the way. I'm just venting my little wah-wahs, okay? There was a point where I had to go to the shops, which is not even 100 meters down the road. It's beautifully close. But when I did the round trip, I got back home and I was so exhausted I had to have a nap. That sucks! I'm too young for this. What is going on? I honestly, and kind of being so bedridden, I couldn't, I didn't have the energy to do anything I would like to do, if I had time off work, I could, going into the garden or reading a book properly or doing some art or something like that, even just a walk around the blocks and that kind of stuff. Didn't have the energy. I'm just stuck in bed, either just sleeping or watching dumb videos on YouTube. My brain, it was just turning to mush. You can actually feel the exhaustion just multiple days in succession of nothingness. And in the midst of that, I'm then meant to do a sermon this upcoming Sunday and prep for that. And I'm missing out on rock climbing now because I'm too sick to do that. I'm missing out on Eden's conversational group thing. I can't do that. Thursday's Dungeons and Dragons night. Nope, that's out the window. I just don't have any energy to do anything. And it's not very good for my mental health. It sucks. When I'm kind of in that space, I find that multiple days in succession, they just kind of drain and exhaust me. And I can't even imagine and put myself in the shoes people that are perpetually sick or ill or challenged and things like that. Because I found it so hard, even just after a couple of days, right? My mental health, and maybe that's something I need to work on and getting a bit more re-centered in those spaces and reorientating a bit. And that's a work in progress. I don't think I'm there yet, of grounding myself in those times and seasons. But it just sucks for the mental health in those spaces. Is that right? Like when you're in those spaces, and suddenly all these negative things start emerging. All the pros and pluses and thankfulness points suddenly kind of start to dissipate. And you're just stuck there in like this. You're just caught up in your own negative, vicious cycle. I was able to go for a walk in the Cranbourne Gardens yesterday. That was beautiful. I was very thankful for that. As your energy kind of starts to restore, I found my health state base going a bit back. But when you're in those spaces, it's so true that your worldview shrinks. Is that fair to say? Like your vision, your position, your platform of being able to see the bigger picture is greatly diminished. You get so fixated on all these little anxious points or all these little tensions or all those kinds of things because you're just stuck in this space of lethargy. And that is tough. And then when you're thinking and trying to grapple with faith, which I had to do because I was prepping for a sermon, right? I'm thinking about like faith and engaging with it in these points. And I'm just like, faith, like what is even that about in points like this, right? Like here I am trying to articulate and prep for a sermon in a sphere where I feel so restricted. Faith, though, has an interesting reflection that comes out of this text. With all these heroes and these greats and these people and individuals, it has this beautiful list of strong figures of the faith to kind of reflect on in the midst of times like that, right? Like the text provides literal dot points of these individuals who interacted with what it means to resonate faith to such a degree that the author of Hebrews, who has, again, traditionally been attributed to Paul, but might be pretty much anonymous, and that's cool too. Whoever the author was, doesn't matter. They picked up something from these people and was like, these are beautiful examples of what it means to live faithfully, to engage with the faith. These are who he regards, or she regards, who knows, question mark, as the greats. Their expressions of faith were profoundly moving in such ways that they changed the courses of history just through enacting and engaging with the faith. But here's the thing that kind of helps me recenter when I'm having crap spaces, like spaces where I'm feeling lethargic and like I don't know what I'm doing and flailing around, right? These heroes of faith were flippin' human too. They didn't necessarily glide through experiencing and engaging with faith like some kind of revered saint, angel just gliding through perfectly. No, they at points could kind of suck. They were grappling with what it means to be human just as much as I can grapple with what it means to be human, and you and us. This is something that I found kind of humanizing, and then kind of realizing that faith, in a sense, happens even despite our confrontations and challenges that it means to be human sometimes, with our flailing like a snake with its head cut off sometimes. Faith, you have Abraham, he's like one of the big figures of the faith. He's like first one on that list, right? As they're starting their dot points. Father of, the nation of Israel and that kind of stuff of what to come. Yeah, no, he flailed around. Like he was ready to sell off, to give his wife away as soon as someone bigger intimidated him slightly. He was like, please take my wife, just leave me alone. He didn't even say it was his wife. It was just like, take this lady. Just had to... Yeah, come on, that's kind of dodge, right? And then you have your individuals like Isaac, who was duped by Jacob, let's be real, he was kind of a jerk to his brother Esau in duping him out. Tricking his father into giving him the blessing as well. You can argue that's an act of faith, but on the book, it's kind of like, come on, man, that's a bit jerk. Joseph, Oh, he was a bit full of himself, wasn't he? Especially at the beginning, wearing his fancy new little coat, showing off to his brothers, hailing how much greater he is, and like he had dreams that they're going to serve him, and puffing up his chest. A bit arrogant, right? He had his moments of flailing around. And then, like, you have Moses, who wasn't even actually able to enter the promised land because there was this whole scene of, like, you know, God telling him to talk with the stones, and instead he starts thwacking them out of frustration and anger. So you have these figures that are listed here, which are beautiful examples of the faith, but they weren't perfect, were they? They grappled with what it means to live faithfully. And I think that's kind of the point. That's kind of the point of texts like this, because the Hebrew Scriptures never shies away from both the strengths of those that have come before us and the weaknesses of those who have come before us. It's this messy concoction that makes a human, right? We even have contemporary examples, like, you know, even like Martin Luther. He had his shortcomings, absolutely. Like, great figure in, like, getting so many people out of these pits of, like, reigned control and, you know, giving people the capacity to read the Bibles for themselves and starting a whole movement in that. But he was also kind of anti-Semitic. He also suggested that, hey, maybe we should burn down some schools and temples of Jewish people. You also had like figures like Mother Teresa, who some of the of her readings after she passed, like, pointed out that she grappled with faith. Like she even admitted, like, a lot of the time she felt like she was wearing a mask. That's like real human experience. These are people that are regarded as massive pillars of the faith, but they also were conflicted. They questioned whether God was even there. They had to grapple with what it means to be human and fail and fall over. My emphasis here is something important, that faith does not equate to a perfect human being. I really want to highlight that. If someone is presenting necessarily just as a perfect human being, chances are they've got a lot of skeletons in their closet. Each of these people, they struggled. They expressed their strong faith, but it came through trial and error, both historical and contemporary. Faith has accomplished great and beautiful and real things, overcoming some serious challenges despite their humanity. Despite. God is able to really get in the midst of really what it means to be human. And even when we fail and flail around, don't use that as an excuse to just, like, if you're on a negative course, just to kind of keep excusing yourself either. Like, faith also pulls us to personal growth and development, to recognize our weaknesses and recognize our shortcomings and actively participate in healing and restoration of those things as well. Like, it's not just a get out of jail free card. Like, faith allows us to, like, accomplish great things despite our negative qualities. It doesn't mean don't work on yourself and personally grow, but progress in those departments, it's not linear. You'll have days of, like, ebbing and flowing. You know, even when Moses, that event, you know, when he struck the stones out of frustration and anger, that happened after he'd already led all the people out of Egypt, right? So this is like, progress isn't linear, people. Progress isn't linear. And I think that's just something that I find kind of relieving to kind of interact with. Like, especially when I'm having, you know, weeks that I'm just not in the game. Like, I'm just having seasons where I'm just feel so raw or frustrated, you know? Like, gosh, I'm no poster child for a perfect human. I have my flailings and absolute stupid mentalities sometimes. But there's beauty in that. In that God kind of still try, like, it's our willingness to try still, right? That's the core component that I really want to engage with here. Because it doesn't matter necessarily sometimes who it comes from. Faith can turn up in very surprising ways. Like Rahab. Thank you so much for bringing that up, Alan. Rahab is a great example of that. Like, she doesn't tick any of the traditional Hebrew boxes of expectation of where a good, faithful human would come from. For one, pagan background, right? Rahab is the lady that kind of took in the siege of Jericho, which was happening. There were some spies of the Israelite nation that were kind of looking for a place to shelter, and she took them in out of faith to kind of cover their tracks. Something she didn't have to do. That was a lot harder for her to do than if she just like ratted them out, right? But faith she engaged with. And this is a woman with she's described as a harlot. She was a harlot, prostitute. Like, think of some of the most people that you would just not expect faithful engagement with God from, right? And yet here she is, listed among the greats. What? Don't underestimate where faith can sometimes well up from and who it can come from. God is right in the midst. God isn't just necessarily working through the kurem or the crop. It's a lot more messy than that. God gets his fingers right in the mess, and it's beautiful. Faith, grappling even what that is. I think sometimes we can kind of just make it synonymous with belief. Sometimes we can just lump belief and faith in the same category. We kind of touched on it, Gemma kind of touched on it last week, and I want to kind of extrapolate a little bit there as well. Faith is very much an active thing. Some scholars have even argued that, when faith rocks up and you read it in the New Testament and the Old Testament, that kind of thing, maybe a better translation might be something along the lines of faithing. Like it's a verb. Like it's very much a doing thing. For example, the difference between, this is going to be the most mundane example to give, anyway, after some of these examples that this guy's listed of the great deeds, but laundry, right? I believe that I should hang my laundry out. I should put it, I believe it would be good for my clothes to aerate and not just remain in the basket. But it might not get done, right? The faith example of that might be, okay, well, I know deep down that it would be good for my my laundry to be hung up on the line, so I'm going to put them up on the line. And there you go. It's the actual act of engaging with what your core belief is, in which it manifests into the world. It's not just something that sits in the sidelines of, yeah, I know that. It's something that actually pulls you. You see the bigger picture and you start to work towards that. Faith is a verb. I love the idea of faithing. I'm a big advocate for faithing. When we read faith, it should be seen as an active word. It's not just a simple I know that. It's a beautiful, profound experience to be pulled by your faith and engage with it in that way. And again, never underestimate when and where it can come from. It helps me recenter recognizing the imperfections of the world when I read the greats up there and recognize their humanity that the Hebrew scriptures really just leave bare. It helps me recenter so much. We won't always get it right. There's days where we'll 100% feel like we suck, but it's how we then continue forward that really matters, and how we continue to re-engage and reignite living actively with the faith, and with a sense of hope. Hope is something that I would like to quickly quote from John Macquarie, is different to optimism. And I think John Macquarie really hits the nail on the head when he writes, hope, of course, contains no guarantee. It does not make things easy, but gives strength to undertake the difficult. It is very important indeed to notice that there is a great difference between hope and optimism. Hope is humble, trustful, vulnerable. Optimism is arrogant, brash, complacent. Hope has known the pang of suffering and has perhaps even felt the chill of despair. It's not just blind optimism that faith is expressed, it's through hope. A lens of hope, of seeing this bigger picture and what the kingdom of God is all about. It's when you're pulled out of your small view and your small vantage point and can suddenly see a picture of something much bigger and much greater, that it kind of pulls you to keep working towards that vision of God, of God's kingdom, of what all that represents, and pulls you and challenges you to engage differently with these things unfolding, things that would otherwise have seemed impossible, or at least, very least, improbable, suddenly can be overcome through that hope and that faithing experience. And I love how entwined faith is so much. Typically, most of the time when you hear of faithing, it's so deeply tied within the community and networks around. And my experience of faith has so often included strange things falling into place through people as well. It's this communal exercise of faithing together, which I think is so profound and life-altering and changing. Faith can be so beautifully communal. That's why we're all here. That's why we engage together. There's something profound engaging with others. And, necessarily sometimes even faith will come from people outside that we don't even expect. And that's beautiful. Faith kind of gives us this glimpse of what could be. I loved as well hearing Gemma talk last week about the housing for young mums and the progress that's happening, because they're building units on site after 7 years of trying to overcome. And now in February, these houses for mums, single mums with bubbers on the way or there, that they will have a roof over their head. That's a vision of kingdom God stuff that's suddenly manifested through faithful engagement. Now, I remember with them, when they first started, when that dream and that kind of concept started to first trickle through, of praying with them Fridays on the Fusion Courtyard of please God, we just pray for those single mums and that we can provide and engage. But there's so many points along that way that it would have just seemed impossible, especially with each roadblock where you feel like it just can't be overcome, and the council this and the land that, and will it even be able to sustain, and all these roadblocks that you feel and it just takes that hope, that faithful hope and engagement with keep on tackling it. You see this bigger picture, something bigger, and even when it all seems possible, you're still trying faithfully, not perfectly, faithfully, to engage with those things. Oh. Humans are a composite of stunning flaws, but also great strengths, aren't we? Which I think is a great kind of lead into communion. There were some fascinating characters around the table at the Last Supper. That's fair to say. You had everything from tax collectors to zealots to, the guy that's about to backstab Jesus. You had all these individuals who were faithing as best they could, not always getting it right, having their conflictions and challenges. A contemporary list of looking back after the post-Jesus times as well would be the 12 disciples, and regarding their faithfulness and their honest engagement in trying. But they were imperfect humans, and that shone through a lot. They didn't always get it right, but when, Last Supper and Jesus is having his meal with his friends, he's invited them around the table, and despite their flaws, he can see their faith. And he taps into that. That's beautiful. And that's who the meal's for. It's for basically honest faithing. That honest experience of trying to see something bigger and greater than ourselves. And that's beautiful. And I would just love to invite the people who are on communion this morning to come up, grab one of our trays, and I'll just pray over it before it's sent out.